We are now joined by the managing editor of the Afirca Report, which is one of the leading news sources when it comes to the African continent, and it's part of the Jeune Afrique group. A very warm welcome to Nicholas Norbrook joining us from Paris.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for honoring this invitation. Nicholas, if you look at the developments that we saw over the past year, which was entirely marked by the effects of the coronavirus, how do you think it has changed relations between Europe and Africa?
Well, when it really first started to kick off in March, I think everyone saw that there was this collapse into real competing nationalisms. Obviously, we'd had a flavor of it with America first, but when countries started stealing plane loads of PPE off the tarmac from each other, then it became, a really particular kind of feeling. And if it was difficult for countries like Germany and France, who are having their PPE stolen by America, you can imagine what it was like for countries with less sort of diplomatic heft in Africa. They found it incredibly difficult. And in fact, talking to the CEO of Kenya's largest bank, Equity Bank, a man called James Mwangi, he really said that that was an eye-opening experience for him, but it actually forced the country to really look at its own manufacturing processes, and they managed to create factories where they created PPE for the whole of the country and even turned to export. But in terms of the relationship with Europe, I think that certainly introduced a little bit of coldness into it, especially when you had China sending airplane loads of masks across the continent. No doubt good PR. There was also meant to be a summit, which didn't happen because of COVID, and a treaty change to the Cotonou Agreement, which runs out this month. It runs out in December, and we still don't really have a successor to it. So I think a lot of African leaders are not particularly impressed with the way that European countries and the European Union has, really only focused on its own issues, which, I mean, in a period of pandemic is totally understandable, but nevertheless, the feeling is there. I think there's also something else to say on debt, probably. Only a small fraction of the over $100 billion that various African countries owe has been renegotiated or rolled over. And perhaps they could have expected more from European partners in those negotiations. It's much more difficult nowadays. There's a much more fragmented nature in terms of who is holding that debt, both public and private sector operators. But still, I think that probably European partners could have done more there.
And Nicholas, some analysts say that the economic development on the continent has been reduced to the level they were the African countries were 10 years ago. How fast do you think the recovery can take place?
Well, I think that people who talk of a V-shaped recovery, they're fantasizing. Certainly when it comes to Africa's partners in Europe and the US, it's going to be quite tough. And those are, very important trading partners for the continent, important sources of capital, and also aid in some quarters. I know the United Kingdom is cutting its own aid budget. But China is doing okay, and they have become, a third or so of Africa's trade is done with China. China's recovery and bounce back has given a floor to commodity prices. So that certainly helped outside of oil. It's going to be very difficult for oil producers next year. Any currencies linked to oil will suffer. The Naira, the Kwacha in Angola and in Zambia, I think they will also suffer. So I think investors will certainly be more cautious. That said, in the last few days, Côte d'Ivoire managed to, raise $1 billion at 5%, which is pretty good going, considering where we are. Again, if you're Zambia and Angola or even Benin. I think Benin have had to shelve plans to raise money. That tells you that I think investors are going to be quite cautious going forward in 2021. So if you're looking to raise money in Africa, I think you'll have a more complicated time.
This year has been a tough year for most private companies, and the pandemic has forced most of them to innovate in order to stay relevant, to stay in business. Talking about Africa Report, what have you done in that sense when it comes to innovation?
Well, I mean, we have not been spared by the pandemic. Everyone is working remotely, which, to be honest, hasn't changed too much for us. We have a very small editorial kernel here in Paris, and all of our journalists are on the continent in various African countries, and some of our editorial staff are also in Africa. So we're used to working at distance. But really, I think it's been the switch to a more digital-first model. So we're launching a paywall on the site in March. We're restructuring all our operations so we can deliver much more than we currently do on the website. And that's an exciting thing, really. We've been forced into it by COVID, but it's an exciting thing to be launching this new product. That will be in March 2021 for the Africa Report.
And moving forwards together, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I beg your pardon?
Moving forwards together is the question we're trying to answer during these Digital Africa Business Days. What's your take on this?
I think moving forwards together is a great title because it points to a phenomenon that we're going to see much more of. We were talking about how, classic partners have become more complicated for Africa and African countries. And so I think we're going to see the flowering in 2021 of a whole new set of relationships. We have increasing amounts of investment and trade between Turkey and African countries. South Africa just signed a deal with ASEAN, the ASEAN group of countries, which includes Singapore in Asia. We're going to see more Vietnam-Africa relationships. And I think that's a very healthy one for African countries to be able to leverage, really, their various relationships.
Thank you very much, Nicholas Norbrook. It was great to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.